Welcome to the Forge Over 40 podcast. My name is Steve Didier, and this show is for high performers who refuse to let their edge quietly erode. If you've built companies, led teams, carried responsibility for decades, but lately your focus feels duller, decisions feel heavier, and your mental stamina isn't quite what it used to be, this is where we rebuild the biological systems that your leadership depends on. And we do it on a physiological level. So let's get right at it. Stress. Stress is not why you're burned out. That's the story that people tell themselves because it's easy to understand and it lets them off the hook without really solving anything. But it's not accurate. Because if stress was the real problem, you would have burned out years ago. Think about that for a second. You didn't just start dealing with pressure at 40 years old. You've been under pressure your entire adult life, building a business, leading teams, making decisions that actually matter, carrying financial responsibility, dealing with uncertainty. None of that is new to you. In fact, that's the environment where you thrive. That is exactly where you built your reputation. That's where you separated yourself from the average guy who folds the moment things get just a little uncomfortable. So, if stress didn't break you then, why would it suddenly break you now? The answer is, it wouldn't, which means we need to look someplace else. What actually changed is not the presence of stress. It's the level that you're operating at. Your life scaled, and at the same time, your body did not. Let me explain what I mean by that. Early on, when you're building something, everything is simpler. Fewer moving parts, fewer people, faster decisions. You're closer to the ground. You can move quickly, adjust quickly, and recover quickly. Your environment is intense, but it's contained. You can handle it because the total system demand is still within your capacity. Now, fast forward. The business is bigger. The stakes are higher. The decisions carry more weight. There are more variables, more people depending on you, and there are more things that can go wrong. Even when things are going well, the complexity is much higher. You are no longer just executing. You are managing systems, people, outcome, the second and third order consequences of every single decision that you make. That's a completely different level of demand. But here's the problem. Most high performers never adjust how they support themselves biologically as their life scales. They keep running the same internal operating system they used to when things were smaller. And that is where the breakdown starts. Think about it like a high performance engine. When that engine is tuned properly and you're running within its design, everything is smooth. It's responsible, it's powerful. You hit the gas and it goes. But if you start pushing that engine harder, increasing the load, running it hotter, and you don't upgrade the cooling system, the fuel system, or the way it's maintained, it doesn't just keep performing at a higher level forever. It will start to overheat. At first, it's going to be subtle. You may not even notice it right away. Maybe it runs just a little bit hotter than it used to. Maybe performance is slightly inconsistent. Nothing catastrophic, just small signals that something's off. Most people ignore that stage. They assume everything is fine because the engine's still running. So they push it harder. And that is exactly what happens with high performers over 40. Your output increased. Your responsibilities increased. The complexity of your life increased. But your recovery, your fueling, your nervous system management, all of the things that actually support that level of output, they stayed the same or potentially got worse. Now, the engine's running hot. This is where it starts to show up in ways that don't immediately look like a physical problem. You notice that your focus maybe isn't as sharp. You sit down to do something that used to be automatic and there's a slight delay. You can still get it done, but it just takes more effort to get into it. Decision making feels heavier, not because you don't know what to do, but because there's more friction in the process itself. You start to feel that low level fatigue that never really goes away. Not enough to stop you, but enough that you're absolutely aware of it throughout the day. Training feels different. Your gym time feels different. You can still push, but it costs more. Your recovery takes longer. The return on your effort isn't quite what it used to be. And the one that really bothers most guys is this. That internal drive that used to feel automatic now feels like something you have to create on demand or manufacture. You can still access it, but it's just not there all the time like it used to be. So what do? You respond the way that you always have. You push. You tighten things up. You try and be more disciplined. You tell yourself you need to get sharper, more focused. Get back to the way that you used to operate. Maybe you add a little more intensity in the gym because you think that will wake things up. Or maybe you lean a little harder on caffeine to compensate for the drop in energy. From the outside, it looks like you're doing everything right. But internally, you're pushing an engine that is already in the process of overheating. And this is where the misunderstanding around stress really starts to hurt you, because you label the problem incorrectly. You say, I'm burned out because I have too much going on. No, you are burned out because your system cannot support what's going on anymore. And that is a completely different problem. One is about reducing external pressure. The other is about rebuilding internal capacity. I went through a version of this myself. There was a period where everything on paper looked solid. Business was moving, training was consistent. I was doing all the things that I had always done, but it just felt different. Energy wasn't the same. My drive wasn't the same. There was just more friction in everything that I did. And my first instinct was exactly what you'd expect. I pushed harder. I dialed in everything tighter. I trained harder. I stayed more disciplined. And all that did was dig the hole deeper, because I wasn't dealing with a lack of effort. I wasn't dealing with a lack of discipline. I was dealing with a system that is no longer supporting the level of my output. That's the shift that you have to make inside. You have to stop looking at this like something's wrong with your mindset and start looking at it like your operating system is outdated for the level that you're playing at now. Because if you don't make that shift, you're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. More effort, more pressure, more push. And the engine doesn't fix itself when it's under more load. It tends to break. So if we stay with that engine analogy for a minute, the next question becomes pretty obvious. What is it that's causing the engine to overheat? Because it's not just that you're doing more. It's how your body is being forced to operate under that increased demand. When an engine overheats, it's never just one thing. It's not like a switch flips and suddenly everything breaks. It's usually a combination of factors that stack up quietly over time. Cooling system isn't quite keeping up. Fuel delivery maybe isn't optimal. The load is higher than what the system was originally designed for. Individually, none of those things might shut the engine down, but together they create a situation where the system can't stabilize itself anymore. And that's exactly what's happening here. Your body is dealing with a combination of stress inputs that are hitting all at the same time. And again, your body doesn't separate those into neat little categories. It doesn't care whether the stress is coming from work, your gym time, lack of sleep, or poor recovery. It all goes into the same bucket. Now think about what your average week looks like. You've got mental demand that basically never shuts off. You're making decisions all day long, managing people, solving problems, thinking ahead, dealing with things that have real life consequences. That alone is a constant drain. And then you layer in training on top of that. Most guys in this position don't train lightly. They push. They go to the gym and they hit it. They want to feel like they're doing something. They want intensity. So now you're adding yet another stressor on top of an already loaded system. Then we look at sleep. And this is where a lot of people start lying to themselves a little bit. They'll say, yeah, I sleep 6 hours, sometimes 7. But the quality is not there. You're wired at night. Your mind is still running. You wake up, not completely recovered, but functional enough to get along, So now you're starting the day off slightly behind. Then you look at nutrition. Maybe you skip breakfast because you're busy. Maybe your meals are inconsistent. Maybe you rely on coffee to bridge the gap when your energy inevitably drops. Again, none of these things are catastrophic on their own, but when you stack them together, day after day, week after week, year after year, now you have a system that's consistently being pushed without ever fully recovering. And that is where the engine analogy really starts to make sense, because you're not just driving the car harder. You're driving it harder while the cooling system is compromised, while the fuel is inconsistent, and while the maintenance is being completely ignored. And then you're surprised when the performance starts to drop. Here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. Your body doesn't just fall in that situation. It adapts. It adapts in a way that protects you, not in a way that makes you perform better. When your system detects that it's under constant load without adequate recovery, it starts to conserve. Energy production becomes much more conservative. Your body becomes more efficient at doing less. Your nervous system stays more activated because it assumes you need to stay alert to handle the ongoing demand. Recovery processes in this phase get deprioritized because the system is focused on getting you through the day, not optimizing long-term performance. And this is where the symptoms start showing up. You feel that steady drop in baseline energy. You notice that your tolerance for stress is lower, even though you've dealt with similar stress your entire life. You start to feel more mentally fatigued from the things that used to be pretty easy to handle. Your workouts stop giving you the same return, and that internal drive starts to feel inconsistent. But here's the problem that most people are going to completely understand. They think those symptoms, are the problem. They think the fatigue is the issue. They think the lack of motivation is the issue. They think the drop in performance is the issue. Those things are not the problem. Those things are signals. They're signals that are telling you the system underneath is no longer operating the way that it should. But instead of listening to those signals, most high performers try to override them. They treat fatigue like an obstacle instead of feedback. They treat lack of drive like a weakness instead of a warning. And this is where the edge starts to come in. Because at some point, you've got to be honest with yourself about this. You've built your success on being able to push through things. And that's the strength. But in this phase, that strength becomes a liability because now, instead of adjusting when the system is under strain, you ignore it. You keep pushing. You keep demanding more output. You keep telling yourself that you just need to get sharper, more disciplined, and get back to where you were. That mindset worked when your system had the capacity to absorb that pressure. It does not work when the system's already overloaded. And this is where a lot of people get stuck in a loop. They feel a little bit off, so they push harder. Pushing harder creates more strain, and more strain makes them feel worse. So they push even harder to compensate. The loop here is not going to correct itself. It only ends one way. The system eventually forces you to slow down. And in most cases, it doesn't do it gently. It does not send you a polite message asking you to take it easy. It starts shutting things down. Energy drops harder, focus gets worse, recovery falls apart, and drive disappears in a way that you cannot just force to return. At that point, you are no longer managing performance. You're managing damage. And the frustrating part is most of this could have been avoided if you'd recognized what was happening earlier. But that requires a shift that a lot of high performers resist. It requires you to stop seeing yourself as someone who just needs to push harder and start seeing yourself as someone who needs to operate a high performance system in the correct fashion. Because right now, whether you realize it or not, you are running that system into the ground. Once you start understanding this clearly, the conversation changes. Because now we're not talking about stress anymore. We're talking about whether your body is actually equipped to handle the life that you've built. And those two things are not the same thing. Most people keep trying to manage the outside. They look at their schedule. They look at their workload. They think the solution is to cut things back, take a break, maybe get away for a few days and reset. And that can help temporarily, but it doesn't solve the real problem. Because the problem isn't that your life is demanding. The problem is that your system isn't supporting that demand anymore. You didn't burn out because you became weaker. You burned out because the level that you're operating at requires a different version of you physiologically. And that's really the problem that not many people want to deal with, because it's a lot easier to say, I'm just under a lot of stress right now. It's a lot harder to say, the way I'm running my body no longer matches the level that I'm playing at. And look, this is where the edge comes in. You built your success by being able to tolerate things that other people simply can't. Long hours, pressure, uncertainty, responsibility. You leaned into it when other people backed off. That's what got you to where you're at. But what got you here is not what keeps you here. At a certain point, the game changes. If we go back to that engine for a second, you wouldn't take a high-performance car, double the load on it, run it hotter, and then ignore maintenance and expect it to perform the same way forever. That would just be stupid. You would upgrade the systems that support the demand on the car. Better cooling, better fuel, more attention to how it's running. Because you understand that performance at that level requires a different standard. But when it comes to your own body, most people don't do that. They expect the same inputs to produce the same outputs, even though everything else in their life is scaled. And when it doesn't work, they blame stress. That is the disconnect. You're not dealing with too much stress. You're dealing with a system that hasn't been upgraded to handle your current life. And until you fix that, nothing is going to stabilize. You might have good days. You might feel like you're getting your edge back for a short period of time, but it's not going to hold because the foundation is still off. This is the point where you're going to have to make a decision. It's not a complicated one, but it's also not an easy one either. You can keep running the same pattern, keep pushing, keep overriding the signals, keep telling yourself that you just need to lock in and get sharper, or you can step back and address what's actually happening. That will mean rebuilding your body and how it produces energy. It means getting your nervous system out of a constant stress response. It means actually recovering in a way that supports the level of output that you expect from yourself. It means eating in a way that fuels performance instead of just kind of getting you through the day. And it means training in a way that builds capacity instead of just beating yourself into the ground. None of this is complicated, but it definitely requires a shift in how you think. You stop treating your body like something you can just push indefinitely without consequence, and you start treating it like the system that everything else depends on. Because at the end of the day, that's what this comes down to. Your business, your leadership, your decisions, your performance, all of it sits on top of your biology. If that foundation is solid, everything else becomes easier. If that foundation is unstable, everything is going to be a lot harder than it needs to be. As of right now, if you're feeling burned out, flat, or like your edge is slipping, that's not random. That's your system telling you it's just not keeping up anymore. You can ignore that if you want. A lot of people do. They keep pushing, keep grinding, keep trying to force it, and for a while, they'll get away with it. But they're not going to get away with it forever because this doesn't level out. It doesn't magically fix itself while you keep running the same pattern. Not only does it not run out, it compounds. The fatigue gets deeper. The drop in performance gets more noticeable. The gap between what you expect from yourself and what you're actually able to deliver keeps getting wider. Eventually, you're going to hit a point where you just can't push through it anymore. That's the wall. And when you hit that wall, you're not making small adjustments at that point. You're rebuilding everything. So, you've got a choice. You can address this now while it's still fairly easily manageable, or you can keep going the way you are and wait until your body forces the issue. Because if you keep running the same way, you're not going to grind your way back to peak performance. You're going to go the opposite way. You are going to burn all the way out. And that is a much harder place to get back from. If you want to start rebuilding that foundation, my 30-day energy reset walks you through the exact sequence for restoring metabolic stability, nervous system recovery, and cellular energy production. It's free, links in the description. And remember this one thing. You do not tolerate mediocrity in your business. Don't tolerate it in your biology. I'll see you all very soon. Take care.